Earth, a death world so brutal, aliens called it a myth. Until Zekhial found it, a planet of fire, blood, and humans who don't survive, they conquer. What secrets does this savage world hide? Dive into the chaos, keep reading. Then, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more epic HFY, fueling us craft even wilder tales. The legends of the universe were as vast and varied as the stars themselves, but none more persistent than the myth of the death worlds. For centuries, across countless galactic empires, death worlds were nothing but a whispered tale, a story passed down like a boogeyman's warning to children. Planets too hostile, too dangerous for life to flourish, or so the elders said. None had ever ventured to prove it, until now. In the shimmering heart of the Zekhian Republic, nestled within their sleek, crystalline spires, lived the people who had long claimed the title of the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. Their technology surpassed that of every known species, and their cities gleamed under the glow of artificial suns. The Zekhian had no predators, no natural disasters that could rattle there. They lived in comfort, safety, and existence unmarred by any real challenge. To them, the death worlds were a myth. Zekhial, a weary Zekhian scientist with a glint of defiance in his silver eyes, hunched over a flickering holographic star map in the Republic's Hall of. Around him, smug elders in shimmering robes scoffed at his obsession. Death worlds? A myth, one sneered, voice dripping with disdain. Why waste time on savage rocks when we rule the stars? Zekhial smirked. He'd already founded a JAG signal labeled Earth, pulsing like a dare. The Zekhian thought themselves untouchable, their crystalline cities flawless. Earth was about to prove them dead wrong. But Zekhial, always the outlier, had never been one to accept the conventional. He'd heard the stories too, of course. Those stories passed from one generation to the next, of planets so deadly that life had to evolve in the most brutal of ways. Of ecosystems that fought back, leaving no room for weakness. And yet, there had always been something that gnawed at the back of his mind. What if they were wrong? What if these stories were real? The nagging thought had led him to a dusty corner of the archives, where a forgotten record had caught his eye. An ancient transmission intercepted from somewhere beyond the known reaches of Zekhian space, dated back eons ago, a transmission that was marked, quite simply, Earth. Zekhial's fingers hovered over the controls, the hologram flickering and buzzing before him as he accessed the first of the. It was raw, unrefined, a collection of fragmented human images, static-laden, full of noise. Content was unmistakable. Screams, explosions, human figures locked in violent conflict. It was a world at war, a world of brutality and survival. The images flashed by in rapid succession, cities in flames, people fighting not just for land or power, but for life itself. For existence. This is Earth, Zekhial muttered under his breath, his heart pounding in his. This is the death world. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't just a myth. Earth was a planet that had somehow survived the odds, thriving in the chaos, constantly evolving and always fighting. Zekhial's mind raced as he replayed the images, analyzing each fragment. Earth was a living testament to what the universe had warned about, a place where only the strongest survived. But the implications were terrifying. As the images flickered and died away, Zekhial's breath caught in his throat. He had to know more. There was no turning back now. He was determined to prove it. Earth was not a myth, but a challenge waiting to. And he would be the one to answer the challenge. With one final glance at the archives, Zekhial turned toward the council. The next step was clear. The Republic had to know. They would have to go to Earth, and nothing would ever be the same again. Zekhial stood at the vast observation deck of the Zekhian High Command, gazing out at the endless sea of stars that stretched across the galaxy like a. It was beautiful, serene, everything his people had built in their centuries of. And yet, Something gnawed at him, something hollow beneath the tranquility. He had seen it in the fragmented transmission, felt it in his gut, the undeniable truth that Earth was not merely a myth, not just a legend. It was real, and it was waiting for someone brave enough to uncover its dark. His decision had been made. He was not about to let this opportunity slip by. The towering doors of the High Command's council chamber slid open with a soft hiss, and Zekhial entered, his resolve stronger than ever. Inside, the council of elders, the same ones who had scoffed at the idea of Deathworlds in the past, sat in solemn silence, their golden robes gleaming under. At the head of the table sat Counselor Valerie, an imposing figure with sharp, angular features and an air of quiet authority. Zekhial stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of, "I've found Earth, the Death World. It's real." There was a long silence as the council members exchanged looks, their expressions a mix of disbelief and concern. Valerie's piercing eyes locked onto Zekhial's, sizing him up. "You've seen the transmission?" Valerie asked, his voice betraying no emotion. "I have," Zekhial replied, his hands shaking slightly, betraying the storm of, "I know what we've been told about Earth, but this isn't some primitive myth. It's a living, breathing world, and it's more dangerous than anything we've ever imagined." Valerie leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. "And you believe we should send an expedition? That we should risk the lives of our people on some distant, hostile planet?" Zekhial's eyes burned with conviction. "It's not about risk, it's about discovery. The Zekhian have conquered the known galaxy without challenge, but we've never faced anything like Earth. If we don't investigate it now, someone else will, and we may not survive the consequences." The room was heavy with silence. The tension in the air was palpable as the council debated the implications of. The stakes had never been higher. And then, with a heavy sigh, Valerie finally spoke, his voice low but resigned. "Prepare your team, Zekhial. You leave for Earth at dawn." Zekhial's heart raced. This was at the beginning of the greatest journey of his life. The mission to prove the myths wrong. But deep down, a nagging voice whispered, "What if Earth is even worse than we?" The journey from Zekhian space to Earth was longer than Zekhial had imagined. Days, then weeks, passed in the silence of the ship's sleek corridors. The crew, handpicked for their expertise, moved like shadows, their faces tight, with anticipation, their eyes betraying the same nervousness that clawed at. The unknown stretched out before them, a dark, looming promise that grew heavy with each passing moment. As the ship neared Earth's orbit, a strange quiet descended on the crew. The towering, crystalline walls of the command deck reflected the stars around them, creating an eerie glow in the otherwise sterile room. Zekhial stood at the viewport, his gaze fixed on the planet below, his catching in his throat. Earth, the legendary Death World, was more beautiful and terrifying than he had. At first glance, it looked like any other planet, lush green continents, swirling oceans, swirling clouds, just as it had appeared in the images from the. But there was something different, something ominous about the way the atmosphere clung to the surface, a subtle tension that seemed to pulse with the planet's every breath. Zekhial's thoughts flickered back to the ancient warning they had received from the other races: do not underestimate the will of this world. It rang louder now, more haunting, as the planet came closer into view. Approaching atmospheric entry, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, pulling Zekhial from his thoughts. All systems nominal. The ship shuddered as it began its descent, entering Earth's atmosphere. The moment the hull passed through the clouds, Zekhial felt an unsettling shift. The air outside felt heavier, more alive. His heart skipped as the first signs of Earth's wild, untamed nature became. The thick, humid jungle stretched beneath them like a labyrinth of green, the vast swaths of rainforest teeming with life that buzzed and hummed in ways Zekhial had never experienced. The trees, massive and alien, clawed at the sky, their roots sprawling across the earth like ancient serpents. Landing in 5 minutes, The pilot's voice broke the silence, but it barely. Zekhial's mind raced, his thoughts spinning faster than the ship's descent. As the ship touched down, the weight of their mission settled over him like a... The metal ramp descended with a low hiss, and the crew assembled at the exit, their faces hard and grim. Zekhial stepped forward first, his boots making a soft thud against the metal floor as he moved toward the threshold. His breath caught again, this time with awe. The air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating, and yet it carried a kind of vitality Zekhial had never known. The ramp extended fully, and the first thing to hit him was the smell, the pungent scent of wet earth, decaying plant matter, and something far more. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was raw and untamed. The very air felt alien, like it had a life of its own. Zekhial stepped off the ship, the ground beneath him soft and spongy. He crouched down, his gloved hand brushing against the rich, damp soil. The earth seemed to pulse beneath his touch. He looked up to see the vast expanse of jungle stretching out before them, a wall of green so thick it seemed to hum with the sounds of the worlds. His first step onto Earth was a quiet one, filled with wonder and apprehension. The mission had begun, but nothing could have prepared them for what lay ahead. No books, no data, no transmission had ever truly captured the sheer magnitude of what they were. The first sign of danger came sooner than they expected. A sharp rustle ripped through the jungle, and Zekhial spun, heart slamming as a nightmare exploded from the undergrowth, a hulking beast, scales gleaming light, molten obsidian, eyes burning crimson through the shadows. It lunged, claws slashing air, but before Zekhial could blink, a human shadow darted from the trees. Rourke, scarred, wild-eyed, slammed a jagged spear into the creature's flank, roaring, "Not today, you bastard!" The beast shrieked, blood spraying like black ink, as Rourke twisted the weapon with a grin. "Welcome to Earth," he spat, glaring at Zekhial. The crew froze. Zekhial's heart pounded in his chest as he instinctively reached for the weapon. It wasn't a battle they were prepared for, but Earth didn't care about their. It never had. The creature lunged. It was no mere animal. Zekhial realized this too late. With a shriek that shattered the silence, the beast's massive claws swiped at the air, narrowly missing the group. A low growl rumbled in the back of its throat, and in that moment, it became painfully clear. This was not a myth. This was Earth. The air was thick with tension as Zekhial and his team moved cautiously through. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the very ground beneath them was watching, waiting. The massive trees stretched high above, their twisted limbs weaving together, like ancient fingers that reached down to ensnare any who dared to tread beneath. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed amplified in the eerie. The jungle felt alive in ways Zekhial had never experienced, dangerous, unpredictable, and wholly alien. His breath caught when a sudden noise sliced through the thick underbrush. A low, guttural sound, the kind of noise that belonged to something far larger than any creature Zekhial had seen so far. The crew tensed, their hands drifting to their weapons. Zekhial's heart pounded as he slowly motioned for them to hold position. The air felt charged, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. Then, from the thick of the jungle, emerged a group of humans. At first, they didn't look like much, ragged, filthy, their clothing torn, and the first human to step into view was a man, tall and gaunt, his eyes a sharp blue, filled with an unsettling intensity. His skin was weathered, burnt by the sun, and his hands were gripped tightly around a long, crude weapon, something that looked like a mix between a spear and... Zekhial's breath caught as he saw the faint remnants of blood staining the man's face, and in that moment, he realized these weren't the peaceful, innocent humans of the old stories. These were survivors. The rest of the group followed, men, women, children, each one carrying their own weapons, their expressions wary but determined. There was a ferocity to them, a fire in their eyes that spoke of battles fought and lost, of hardships endured beyond anything Zekhial had ever imagined. The group stopped a few paces away from Zekhial's team. The tension was palpable. The humans looked at them with a mix of disbelief and suspicion, as if they had never seen anything like them, or perhaps, Zekhial thought, they had never seen anything like them before. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at any. Finally, the man Rourke stepped forward, twirling a spear caked with dried blood, his blue eyes glinting like chipped ice. "Who the hell are you, and why are you trespassing on my dirt?" he growled, voice. Behind him, humans emerged ragged, sun-scorched, gripping weapons forged from twisted metal and bone. One kid, barely 10, clutched a dagger carved from a Thrax tooth, like he'd killed with it. Zekhial froze. These weren't survivors. They were Earth's goddamn warlords. He glanced back at his team, who stood stiffly, eyes flickering between the humans and their weapons. "We are explorers," Zekhial said, his voice measured but firm. "We come in peace." The words felt hollow as they left his mouth. He had practiced them, but now, in the face of these wild, hardened survivors, they seemed inadequate. The man with the spear narrowed his eyes, his lips curling into a skeptical "Peace," the man scoffed, stepping forward. "You come to a world like this, and you talk about peace. What makes you think we believe a word you say?" Zekhial's mind spun, but he could feel the truth creeping in. Earth was a planet of survival, not diplomacy. The old myths about peace, harmony, and utopias had no place here. The humans in front of him had learned that lesson long ago. The man's eyes flicked over to Zekhial's crew, and then back to him. There was something in his gaze now, a quiet understanding, but also a subtle. "If you want to survive here, you'd better remember one thing," he said, "This world doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care where you come from. It only cares about one thing: if you're strong enough to survive." The tension in the air snapped like a broken wire. Zekhial felt a chill run through him. Earth was not just a death world because of its creatures, its landscapes, or its. It was a death world because its people had been forged in its fires. And now, Zekhial realized, he was trapped in it, too. The humans didn't trust them. That much was clear. Zekhial could see it in their eyes, the cold, calculating look that spoke of lives lived in constant danger, of years spent fighting for survival on a planet. The man who had spoken earlier, the one with the spear, had named himself Rourke, the leader of this ragtag group of survivors. He'd watched Zekhial's team closely, assessing them with the kind of wariness that only comes from years of living in a world where even the slightest misstep. "We're not here to fight," Zekhial had said again, though his voice sounded hollow, even to him. What was the point of diplomacy when everything about Earth screamed violence? Rourke didn't respond to his words. Instead, he motioned for the others to move forward, still keeping a safe distance between his group and Zekhial's crew. They had spent the better part of the day exchanging terse words, trying to figure out what each group wanted. But the truth was, Zekhial couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just in danger from the planet itself. These humans, though seemingly primitive in their appearance, were capable of violence in ways that chilled him to the bone. "Follow us," Rourke had finally ordered, his voice clipped. "You're not going anywhere without our help." Zekhial had hesitated, but with no other option, he had signaled his team to. They trekked deeper into the jungle, weaving their way through thick vegetation that pressed in on all sides, the air damp and heavy. The sounds of Earth's wild world surrounded them, strange, unearthly calls from unseen creatures, the rhythmic drumming of something large moving through the. But it was the stillness that unsettled Zekhial the most. There were no other survivors that Rourke had led them to. No settlements, no camps. Just the jungle, pulsing with a life that had adapted in ways that Zekhial couldn't yet understand. After hours of walking, the group finally came to a clearing, and there, Zekhial's gaze fell upon something that made his stomach churn. It wasn't a settlement. It wasn't a camp. It was an arena. At the center of the clearing stood a crude structure made of metal, the remains of old human technology, broken pieces of vehicles and rusting machinery pieced together to form a ring. Inside, the earth had been scorched, the ground trampled by countless feet. There were remnants of old bloodstains, scattered bones, and the shattered. It was a brutal, visceral sight, one that struck at the very core of what Zekhial had believed about Earth. He had expected danger from its creatures, but this was something else entirely. "This is where we fight," Rourke said quietly, stepping forward. His eyes lingered on the arena with something like reverence in his gaze. "This is where we prove ourselves." Zekhial felt his pulse quicken, but before he could respond, another human appeared, this one smaller, weary, with eyes that darted nervously around. She was holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth, her movements tense as she approached the group. "This is Mari," Rourke said. "She'll show you what happens when you survive." Mari set the bundle down on the ground with a soft grunt, and as she unwrapped it, Zekhial saw a creature unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was massive, its scales gleaming in the light that filtered through its eyes were fierce, and its body was muscular, designed for speed and strength that made Zekhial's heart race in his chest. The creature let out a low growl, revealing its long, sharp teeth. Zekhial's breath caught. It was a predator, a terrifyingly evolved predator, capable of hunting anything that dared to step into his territory. "Meet the Thraks," Mari said, voice cold as steel, unwrapping a beast that made Zekhial's gut lurched in feet of rippling muscle, scales pulsing like living tar, jaws lined with teeth that gleamed like shattered glass. It snarled, a sound that cracked the air, and Mari grinned. "We don't just kill M," she said, hefting a spear rigged with a sparking wire. "We rig traps, lure him in, fry him up." She nodded at a scorched patch nearby, littered with Thrak bones. Tastes like victory. This creature had adapted to Earth's violence in a way that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. It was a living testament to the planet's savage power. "Survival isn't just about living," Rourke added, his voice low. "It's about fighting to stay alive. Earth isn't kind, Zekhial. It never has been." Zekhial turned back to the Thrak, the realization settling in his chest like it wasn't just the planet that was dangerous, it was everything on it, from the creatures to the humans themselves. This was Earth, a death world in its purest form, where only the strong had any. And Zekhial knew, without a doubt, that if they weren't careful, they would become just another part of the planet's unrelenting cycle of survival. The heat of the jungle was oppressive, clinging to Zekhial's skin as he moved slowly behind Rourke and his crew. The predator they had just encountered, the Thraks, still loomed in his mind, its primal hunger a reminder that Earth was a place where nothing could be taken for. But it was what came next that would haunt Zekhial far more than any creature or. The group led him deeper into the jungle, their steps quiet but purposeful. The sounds of Earth's brutal symphony, the calls of hidden creatures, the rustling of foliage faded as they reached the edge of a clearing. Unlike the arenas and makeshift camps they had seen so far, this place was eerily quiet, unnervingly calm. As they approached, Zekhial's eyes widened in disbelief. Before him stood a complex, not a settlement, not a simple camp. This was something more. It was a sprawling compound, built into the very heart of the jungle, a fusion of ancient human construction and makeshift technology. Old, rusted vehicles and abandoned machinery were scattered throughout, repurposed into crude but functional structures. But the true scale of what stood before him didn't become clear until Rourke led them past the barricades and into the heart of the compound. Inside, the air was thick, polluted with the smells of decay and the sharp of something metallic. There were no trees here, only cement and concrete, and structures that seemed to rise from the very earth, built from scavenged. Zekhial's eyes traced the tangled mass of wires, some hooked into the remains of a satellite dish, others running through walls. There was a primitive ingenuity here, a kind of desperation that Zekhial could. "This is our home," Rourke said, his voice grim. "Where we've been living for years." Zekhial looked around, trying to take it all in. The humans had taken pieces of the old world and forged them into something new, a twisted form of survival. His gaze landed on a group of children playing in the dirt, their faces smeared. They carried small weapons, blunt objects, or jagged shards of metal like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What is this place?" Zekhial asked, his voice barely a whisper. He could feel the hairs on his neck stand up as the realization began to settle. Rourke didn't answer immediately. Instead, he led them through the compound, toward a large, open area At first glance, it appeared to be a marketplace, a place for trading, bartering, but there was something in the way the humans moved, something in the way they conducted themselves, that made Zekhial's pulse quicken. This was not a place of peace. This was a place of war, of constant survival. Zekhial stopped in his tracks. In the middle of the square was a large, holographic map, a blueprint of the world itself, sprawled across a makeshift screen. It flickered in and out, but there was no mistaking what it showed. Earth, and all its fractured territories. "We've been mapping the world for years," Rourke said, his tone softer now. "There's more out there than you think. More survivors. More groups like ours. And we've learned something. Something that might interest you." Zekhial's eyes widened as he approached the map. The regions marked in red were not the usual territories of a global empire. No, these were danger zones, places on Earth where Earth's ecosystem had evolved into something far worse than the jungle. These were areas where humanity had not only fought against the planet, but against other survivors, against each other. "We've been piecing together a puzzle," Rourke continued. "The planet isn't just dangerous because of its creatures. It's dangerous because it's a war zone. We've been living through centuries of human history on the brink of extinction. But there's something more. Something we're finally beginning to understand." Zekhial's heart began to race as the pieces fell into place. The humans, these survivors, had not only adapted to Earth's deadly landscape, they had mastered it. What was even more shocking, however, was the revelation that not all humans on Earth were trying to survive. Some were actively working to weaponize Earth's power. They had found ways to use the planet's most dangerous features against each other, developing deadly technologies, weapons forged from the chaos of a dying. "Others out there," Rourke said, almost in a whisper, "they found ways to use, not just to survive, but to conquer. They're using the planet's very nature to wage war. We thought they were myths until we found them." Zekhial stepped back from the map, his mind spinning. Earth wasn't just a place of survival. It was a weaponized planet, a place where humans had learned to thrive not just in nature's chaos, but by using the chaos to their advantage. And what Rourke had just revealed could change everything. "They don't care about diplomacy," Rourke continued, locking eyes with Zekhial. "The Earth isn't just some planet to colonize. It's the key to something much bigger, something far more dangerous." Zekhial felt his stomach tighten. He had thought he was prepared for the worst: predators, storms, natural hazards. But what he was seeing now, the weaponized Earth, the fractured humans, the fight for dominance, it was worse than anything he could have imagined. He wasn't just on a death world. He was standing on the edge of a war. The tension in the air felt like a living thing, coiling tighter with each. Zekhial had spent the last few hours trying to piece together the fragments of information Rourke had shared with him. But the deeper he went, the more. Earth was a place of survival, of violence, of constant struggle, and now, it seemed, a place where power was the true currency. And the humans were not only fighting the planet, they were fighting each other, using Earth's chaos as a weapon. But that wasn't the worst of it. No. As Zekhial stood near the edge of the compound, watching the humans go about their work, his thoughts circled back to the conversation he had overheard earlier, the one between Rourke and a mysterious figure named Kara. Kara had been with the group for years, but Zekhial had sensed something cold and Her presence, a distance that didn't quite fit. She didn't speak much, always observing, never quite integrating into the rest. It had taken him a while to make the connection, but Zekhial's instincts were. Kara was hiding something more dangerous than he had initially. The realization hit him like a cold wave. Zekhial turned sharply to find Rourke approaching him, his face unreadable. "Something's wrong, isn't it?" Zekhial asked, not waiting for Rourke to say. "What are you telling me about Kara?" Rourke paused, his jaw tightening. The muscle in his neck flexed, and for the briefest moment, Zekhial saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It disappeared as quickly as it had come, and Rourke's expression returned to its usual steely mask. "You've noticed, haven't you?" Rourke said quietly, almost as if he was speaking more to himself than to Zekhial. "You're not wrong to be suspicious. Kara's been acting strange ever since we encountered the other group out west." Zekhial's mind raced. The other group. He'd heard rumors of survivors from the northern territories who had a different agenda, factions of humans who had forged alliances with off-world entities. They weren't just living on Earth. They were planning to expand beyond it, using the resources and technology they scavenged from the planet. "Is she working with them?" Zekhial asked, his voice low, steady. Rourke's eyes flashed with something dangerous: anger, frustration, maybe even. He turned, nodding slightly for Zekhial to follow him. They moved through the compound in silence, the noise of the daily activity fading into the background. Zekhial could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His suspicion was growing, and now it was confirmed there was more to he had originally thought. They reached a small, isolated building at the edge of the compound, a place that Zekhial hadn't seen before. Rourke paused at the door and gave him a long, searching look. "I'll tell you everything," Rourke said, his voice tight with restraint. "But you have to understand this isn't just about survival anymore. It's about control. Earth is a weapon, and some people will do anything to claim it." Zekhial's mind spun with the implications. They were no longer just fighting for their lives against the planet's wild. They were fighting for control of something far more valuable, something that could change the course of history. But there was a bigger problem now. Kara was no ally. She had been working behind their backs, aligning herself with the factions that wanted to use Earth as a launch pad for something bigger. The door to the building creaked open, and Zekhial stepped inside. What he saw made his stomach churn. Kara loomed over a table strewn with maps and scavenged junk, her cold eyes glinting as she caressed a pulsing Orbalian tech, its surface swirling with crimson veins like a living heart. "Earth's chaos isn't a curse," she hissed, voice low and fervent. "It's our birthright to wield, to conquer." Zekhial's breath hitched. This wasn't just betrayal. She was forging a weapon to burn the stars, and she'd sold her soul to off-world shadows to do it. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a human betrayal. Kara had been working with off-world entities. She had the technology and the will to turn Earth into a military stronghold. The truth hit Zekhial like a punch to the gut. There was no way to walk back from this. Kara was part of a plan much bigger than any of them could have imagined. Earth wasn't just a death world. It was a battleground for power, and Kara had chosen her side. And now, Zekhial realized, he was stuck in the middle. The air in the jungle was suffocating, thick with the weight of uncertainty and the heavy pulse of impending violence. Zekhial's heart pounded in his chest as he walked through the compound, his mind reeling from the discovery of Kara's betrayal. The humans, the technology, the alien artifact had all came together with a force that was nearly impossible to ignore. Earth was no longer just a dangerous, untamed world. It had become a weapon in the making, and Kara wasn't working alone. There were others, off-world factions interested in what Earth had to offer, and Kara had opened the door to them. But Zekhial knew that he couldn't stand by and let this happen. He had to stop it. He had to warn his people, to make sure Earth wasn't used as a springboard for something far worse. But first, there was the problem of Kara and the weaponized Earth. As the hours passed, The realization hit him like a crashing wave. This was a war for control, a war for a planet that had become far more than anyone could have anticipated. Rourke's face had been grim as he led Zekhial through the compound, keeping their voices low and their movements quieter than before. The compound was unusually still, Zekhial noted. He had expected chaos, the usual frantic movement of people and trade. But now, everything was muted, as though the entire compound had collectively held its. "Where is Kara?" Zekhial finally asked, his voice low, barely a whisper. Rourke's eyes were hard as stone as he turned to face Zekhial. "She is gone. She was planning this, all of it. The faction she is working with, they're ready to take over. They want Earth to be their launch pad, Zekhial. We can't let it happen." Zekhial's chest tightened at the words. He had suspected it, but hearing it out loud made it real, made it dangerous. He turned back toward the makeshift command center, his mind working quickly. There was no time to waste. If Kara was already preparing to move forward with her plan, Zekhial couldn't. "Where are they now?" Zekhial asked, urgency creeping into his tone. "Where are the factions?" Rourke hesitated, his gaze flickering to the compound's perimeter before he answered. "They're waiting in the eastern hills just past the border. But they'll be on us within hours if we don't do something." Zekhial's blood ran cold as he absorbed the information. The clock was ticking. They had only a small window before Kara's allies would strike, before the human factions on Earth would collide with the forces of space and technology that were already converging on the planet. Zekhial knew that the fate of Earth rested in their hands, and the choices made now would define everything that came after. Without another word, Zekhial turned and made his way to the command center, where the scattered remnants of the humans and aliens who had arrived with him waited, uncertain, their faces painted with concern. "We have to act now," Zekhial said, his voice cutting through the tension in the factions are closing in. Kara's plan is already in motion, and if we don't stop her, Earth could become a not just for us but for them, those off-world entities. We can't let that happen. The room fell into a heavy silence as the weight of his words settled over them. Then, one by one, the team nodded, their expressions hardening with resolve. Rourke stepped forward, his face set with a grim determination. "We'll fight," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "If we want to survive, if we want to keep Earth ours, we have to end this now." The team mobilized quickly, gathering whatever weapons and tools they could find, preparing for the coming conflict. Zekhial watched as they worked, humans, aliens, all united by a singular cause: survival, resistance, the fight for Earth's future. As night fell, the air grew heavier with the sounds of nature, the calls of distant predators, the rustling of the wind through the trees. But beneath that, there was a new tension, a quiet before the storm. The team made their way to the eastern hills, where Kara's faction had set up. When they reached the edge of the hills, Zekhial could see them, Kara's men, standing guard, their faces shadowed in the dim light. The group was well-armed, their technology far beyond what Zekhial had expected, and in the center of it all stood Kara, her posture regal, her eyes filled with something cold, something calculating. Zekhial felt his breath catch as he stepped forward, his voice cutting through. "Kara." She turned slowly, the faintest smile playing on her lips. "Zekhial, I knew you would come. You've always been so predictable. You've betrayed us," Zekhial said, his voice hard. "You've betrayed Earth." Kara's smile didn't fade. "Earth isn't just a planet to be conquered. It's a tool, a means to an end. You think the galaxy will leave us alone? That we can just stay here, on this rock, pretending to be safe? You're naive, Zekhial. Earth's power is too great. We'll use it. We'll make sure Earth belongs to us, to the stars." The words hit Zekhial like a slap, and before he could react, the attack began. Explosions tore the night apart, fire lighting up the jungle as Rourke charged. A jury-rigged cannon cobbled from Thrak bones and alien scrap blazing in his. "Eat this, traitors," he bellowed, unloading a blast that vaporized Kara's front line in a shower of sparks and screams. Zekhial, pulse racing, darted through the chaos, awestruck as humans turned the Deathworld's wrath back on itself. The battle raged on, a chaotic blur of fire. Each side fought not just for survival, but for control of a future they could. Zekhial's heart thudded in his chest as he moved, adrenaline coursing through. He had never imagined it would come to this, not like this. The fight was brutal, messy, but the stakes were higher than anything he had. Earth was not just a place. It was a battle for existence for who would control the future of this savage. And now, as the dust settled, the final showdown had begun. The clearing was littered with the broken remnants of the battle-scorched earth, smoldering wreckage, and the low groan of the dying. Zekhial stood at the edge of the field, his breath ragged, his body aching from the violence that had just unfolded. The night was thick with the scent of gunpowder and sweat, the air still crackling with the remnants of chaos. The moon above cast an eerie, silver glow over the aftermath, illuminating the twisted remains of both human and alien technology. He hadn't expected victory to come so quickly, but it had. Kara was dead. Her forces had been scattered, the tide turning in an instant when Rourke's team had made their final push. The humans, though brutal and scarred by years of survival, had fought with a ferocity that Zekhial hadn't thought possible. And now, with Kara's death, the off-world faction she had been working would be in disarray. But Zekhial knew this wasn't the end. The battle for Earth, for control, had only just begun. Zekhial, Rourke's voice cut through the silence, rough and strained. He appeared at Zekhial's side, his face smeared with dirt and blood, his eyes hollow but resolute. He was alive. They were all alive, but at what cost? Zekhial turned to him, his throat tight. How many? He asked, though he already had a sense of the answer. The bodies strewn around the battlefield were a testament to the price they had. Rourke's lips pressed into a thin line. Too many, he muttered. Too many to count. His eyes flickered over the bodies of his people, his comrades, now fallen. There was no joy in this victory, only the grim knowledge that Earth had not been. We didn't win. Not really. Zekhial knew what Rourke meant. The humans had fought hard, but Earth's future was still uncertain. Kara had been a symptom, a part of a much larger problem. The factions that had been using Earth as a tool weren't gone. They were scattered for now, but they would regroup, and when they did, they would return stronger, armed with the knowledge they'd gained from this failed conquest. I'll help, Zekhial said, his voice steady. We'll rebuild. Together. The words felt hollow even as they left his mouth. What could they rebuild in a world so broken? Rourke met his gaze, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes rare. We can't keep fighting forever, he said. We'll need more than just strength. We'll need to unite what's left of Earth's survivors, prepare for what's. Zekhial nodded, though doubt gnawed him. Could Earth ever truly be united? Could these fractured, violent survivors ever come together in peace? He wasn't sure. But what other choice did they have? The sound of footsteps drew his attention, and he turned to see a group of humans approaching. A few survivors from the battlefield, their faces grim, but they carried with them the faint remnants of the technology Kara's faction had. It was crude, but it was functional, and it would be enough for now. The pieces of Earth's future were in their hands, fragmented and battered. They were still there. Rourke looked toward the group, then back at Zekhial. It's not over, he said quietly. But maybe we have a chance to make something different, something that's truly ours. Zekhial gazed out at the wreckage, at the burning remains of the battle. His heart felt heavy, but there was something else, a glimmer of resolve, a spark of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this shattered world could be rebuilt. But it would take more than just surviving. They would need to adapt. They would need to learn to thrive, not just fight. He took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. We'll make it work, he said quietly. We'll fight for Earth. For all of us. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting a faint light over the ravaged battlefield, Zekhial knew that the real war was just beginning. But it was a war that Earth's survivors would fight together. And they would win. The dawn brought no peace. The sun barely peeked above the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield as if to remind them of what had been lost. Zekhial stood at the edge of the compound, watching as the surviving humans worked to clear the remnants of the battle-shifting debris, gathering bodies, and salvaging what they could from the wreckage. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and blood, the earth still warm from the fires that had raged through the night. It felt like the planet itself was holding its breath. Zekhial's thoughts churned. The victory against Kara and her faction was hard-earned, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was nothing more than a temporary reprieve. Earth had become something far darker than he could have imagined. The factions, the off-world powers, everything had converged here, to this one. And if they weren't careful, it would be torn apart, piece by piece. Behind him, Rourke approached, his heavy footsteps breaking the silence. Zekhial didn't turn around, knowing that Rourke had been at his side through the thick of the battle. The man was a survivor, a leader in every sense, but even he seemed different. Now worn down by the weight of what they had done, what they had lost. "We need to talk," Rourke said, his voice hoarse from the battle's aftermath. There was no anger in his tone, no accusation, just a quiet desperation. Zekhial nodded and turned to face him, meeting Rourke's eyes. "About what?" "The future," Rourke replied bluntly. "We've won this battle, but Earth is still a powder keg. Kara's allies will come back. We know that, and they'll come harder. But there's something else we need to consider." Zekhial raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Rourke hesitated before continuing, his expression darkening. "We can't do this alone. You've seen how the humans have been living fractured, divided. It's chaos, Zekhial. Survival is the only thing that's held them together. But if we're going to stand a chance against the off-world factions, we need to unite the scattered human groups. Not just that we need to make alliances. With the humans, with the survivors, with whoever's left." Zekhial's stomach tightened. He had thought of the humans' fractured nature, of their constant infighting, their violence, but the reality of it was something else entirely. He had seen the way they fought each other, how quickly they turned on those who were different, those who were weaker. Could they really be trusted? Could they come together for a common cause? "You're asking me to trust them," Zekhial said slowly, his voice uncertain. "The same people who've been at war with each other for decades. The ones who fought to the death to survive." Rourke met his gaze, his eyes steady. "I'm not asking you to trust them, Zekhial. I'm asking you to help them trust themselves. Earth isn't just a death world because of its creatures or its storms. It's a death world because its people have forgotten how to unite. We've been divided for too long, too scattered." Zekhial's mind raced, the weight of Rourke's words sinking in. He had seen it, the disarray, the distrust, the fractured remnants of humanity, each group fighting for its own survival, each one clinging to its own beliefs, its own vision for the future. There were no governments, no shared values, just isolated factions who lived by one rule: survive at all costs. But perhaps Rourke was right. Perhaps Earth's only hope for survival, its only hope for a future, was through a. But could it be done? Could they forge a new path, a new future? Rourke seemed to read his thoughts. "I know it's not easy, but we don't have a choice anymore. We've seen what happens when we don't fight together. We lose." Zekhial looked out across the battlefield, watching as the survivors began to gather what little they had left. There was hope in the air. Faint but present. He could feel it like a spark waiting to ignite. It wasn't much, but it was something. If they could pull together, if they could unite, maybe, just maybe, they could. For Earth, for the future. "You're right," Zekhial said, finally. His voice was firm, his resolve solidifying. "We'll need to bring them together. We'll need to forge something stronger than what we've been. Rourke's face softened, a glimmer of relief flashing in his eyes. Then we have work to do. As they walked together, the sounds of the survivors working in the background seemed to grow louder, more purposeful. Zekhial couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't in days. Hope. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The future of Earth and all those who called it home was uncertain. But if they could unite the fractured factions, if they could build something more than just survival, maybe, just maybe, Earth had a chance. The compound was quieter now, the tension of battle replaced by a grim. The day had stretched long, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, it cast a haunting glow over the wreckage of the fight. Zekhial stood at the edge of the clearing, staring out into the dense, ever-present jungle. The events of the past days weighed heavily on his shoulders, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, he could feel the immense gravity of what they had. They had won, but at what cost? He was no longer certain what victory meant anymore. Kara's faction was defeated, but the off-world powers those who had once viewed Earth as a pawn to be claimed wouldn't just fade away. And in the wake of the battle, he had seen the fractured remains of humanity. Each survivor group left to pick up the pieces of a world ravaged by conflict. There was no single government, no united front. The planet's future was still at risk. Zekhial turned as he heard the sound of footsteps crunching across the dirt. It was Rourke, his face drawn, but determined, his eyes scanning the scene. He had been working tirelessly since the battle ended, helping to coordinate the cleanup and the recovery efforts. The blood had not yet dried, but the weight of the work ahead hung in the air, like a storm waiting to break. "It's done," Rourke said quietly, his voice hoarse, but there was a quiet. "We've secured what's left of Kara's faction, and we've patched together what can from the wreckage." Zekhial nodded but didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure what to say. They had lost so much too much to ever truly feel like a victory. "I'm not sure how long we can hold it all together," Rourke continued, his eyes turning towards the survivors, their faces still pale from the battle's toll. "But we have to try. There's still hope. We've made it this far." Zekhial finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken weight. "We can't afford to let the past define us, Rourke. Earth is fractured, but we can build something better from the ruins." Rourke met his gaze, and for a brief moment, something passed between them and understanding, perhaps even an unspoken promise. "Then we'll rebuild. We'll fight for a future, for Earth. And maybe this time, it won't just be about surviving." Zekhial felt the spark of something in his chest. It wasn't just hope, but determination. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was long. But Earth was more than just a death world, it was a place of second chances. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the Earth, Zekhial knew that the real battle was only beginning. But this time, he wouldn't be alone. The clearing was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, its orange light filtering through the trees and casting long shadows across the wreckage. The air had cooled, and the smell of burnt metal and blood was slowly dissipating, replaced by the sharp, earthy scent of the jungle. Zekhial stood at the edge of the compound, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The battle was over. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the weight of the future still pressed down on his shoulders like an unspoken promise. The humans had fought bravely, but now they faced the hardest task of all. They had lived in the rubble of the old world for so long, surviving only through their ability to adapt and fight. But survival alone was no longer enough. Now, they needed to rebuild their society, forge alliances, and create something more than just the chaos of constant conflict. The remnants of humanity needed to rise from the ashes of their fractured existence and build a future that wasn't just about holding on but about. Zekhial turned as he heard footsteps behind him. It was Rourke again, the weight of their shared struggle apparent in the lines etched into his face. His gaze, usually so intense and full of resolve, now held a quieter, more. He had seen too much to ever be the same, but there was still a spark of determination in his eyes. The fire of a man who had fought not just for his own survival, but for the survival of something much greater. Is it enough? Zekhial asked, the question weighing heavily between them. Do we have enough to rebuild, to create a future for Earth? Rourke didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out over the compound, watching as the survivors began to. Some were still tending to the wounded, others were preparing to rebuild the damaged structures, and a few had started to gather the technology they had scavenged from the remnants of Kara's faction. The humans were working together, reluctantly at first, but the seed of something new was beginning to take root. We have to make it enough, Rourke said finally, his voice steady but filled with the weight of their shared responsibility. Earth's been through hell, and we've all been shaped by it, but it doesn't have to be like this forever. We can create something better, something that's not just about surviving, but about living. Zekhial studied Rourke for a moment, seeing the resolve in his eyes. The determination wasn't just to survive anymore. It was to thrive. Rourke was right. They had spent so much time fighting against the forces that sought to tear them. But now, it was time to rebuild. It was time to build something that could stand against whatever future challenges would come their way. What about the factions? Zekhial asked, his voice softening. What about the others who are out there, waiting? Rourke's jaw tightened, and his gaze flickered over to the horizon, where the first signs of dusk were settling in. They'll come, Rourke growled, eyes blazing as he kicked open a crate salvaged from the ruins a gleaming relic Earth made, its hull etched with faded runes of a lost human empire. But we're done running. This, he said, slamming a fist on the ancient weapon, says we've been ready for centuries. Zekhial stared, chills racing down his spine. Earth wasn't just a death world, it was humanity's forgotten arsenal, waking up to. We have to show them that Earth isn't just a battleground. It's a place that can be more. It's a place where life can grow, where we can build something that lasts. Zekhial nodded slowly, absorbing Rourke's words. The humans, the survivors, were beginning to understand that Earth wasn't a place to be conquered. It was a place to be nurtured. But that wouldn't be easy. The old wounds, the distrust, the violence they would have to heal. But Zekhial could see the glimmers of hope in the faces around him. He could feel the change, the slow shift from a world of survival to a world of. We'll help them, Zekhial said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. We'll help them build it, together. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Zekhial stood with Rourke, looking out over the survivors who were slowly rebuilding their world. The future of Earth was uncertain, yes, but there was something else in the air. Now a sense of possibility, of something more than just survival. Humanity's future was still in the balance. But if they could forge their alliances, if they could rise above the chaos and create a world where everyone had a place not just to survive, but to live, then perhaps, just perhaps, Earth's true potential could be realized. And maybe, just maybe, the fight for Earth would no longer be a battle for. It would be a fight for a future, one that they could call their own.